Hello and welcome to Road to Future Cities, Tampa, Florida, a GovExec TV series in partnership with the National League of Cities, as NLC celebrates its historic 100th anniversary. I'm your host, George Jackson. Communities across the country have experienced a recent influx of refugees, asylees, migrants, and immigrants. They've intensified demands on local infrastructure and resources like shelter, services, and support. But meeting those needs can vary dramatically from city to city or town to town. Today you'll learn strategies and solutions from local leaders working to ensure resilience and well-being in their respective communities. They spoke last month at NLC's City Summit in Tampa, Florida. Let's kick things off with some opening remarks from NLC CEO and Executive Director Clarence Anthony. Meeting the Moment on Immigration Community Impact starts right now.
Good morning, and thank you all so much for being here in Tampa, Florida, celebrating 100 years of the National League of Cities. And one of the missions of the National League of Cities is to provide solutions and a space for our members to be able to talk about pressing issues that they may be challenged with. But not only to talk about them, is to be able to really explore examples and share those examples with each other so that when you leave this conference, you're prepared to go back home and have conversations that would include your heart. I was there this morning, and being able to say intentionally how you're going to deal with them specifically. And so the topic of immigration in our nation right now is a topic that all of us are interested in, and we are meeting the moment at the National League of Cities by always understanding what are the futuristic issues. And we've been doing work on this issue for a couple of years. We've also, I must tell you, we have resources that are available to our members through a dashboard to see examples of what is happening all over America and how you as local leaders are integrating, engaging, inviting, and providing resources to everyone who is coming into your community, regardless of their immigration status. The individuals are coming to our communities seeking shelter, jobs, local assistance, and ultimately becoming, I would say, members of the communities, neighborhoods, colleagues, and the local economies. So at NLC, we work and look for a strong partner at the federal level. We want to work to come out with comprehensive policy from Congress and the administration. And today, we're just so honored to have a panel that really has had experiences with their community, integrating, engaging, providing support to immigrants that are coming to their communities. We're honored to have a dear friend, but more importantly, a past president of the National League of Cities. Can't help but say Mayor Karen Freeman Wilson from Gary, Indiana, former mayor, who is now president, CEO of the Urban League of Chicago. And I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Freeman Wilson to moderate this important issue that many of you are facing in America. We got to meet the moment. We can't wait on another moment. We got to be prepared for the future. And this panel is going to help us get prepared. Mayor?
Thank you. Thank you, Clarence, and good morning.
Morning.
And so Clarence has laid out the task before us, and I'm so honored to be joined by this esteemed group of panelists who will have a discussion, because this is really all about solutions. And what we understand is that there are certainly newcomers to many of our communities. At the same time, our existing residents have longstanding needs. And very often, I've described the mayor's role as one of being a parent, right? Of meeting the needs of all of his or her residents. And this is one clear example of where that's true. And so let's get started. We're joined today by Mayor Ron Nirenberg of the city of San Antonio, Texas, Mayor Mark Shepard of the city of Clearfield, Utah, and Council Member Mark Rodriguez from Sierra Vista, Arizona. Each of them distinguished leaders and experts, and so I'm excited to engage in what I hope to be a conversation, and know that you will have an opportunity to get involved. And so I'm going to start with Mayor Nirenberg and ask you to just talk about, if you will, how you are meeting the needs of newcomers and really balancing that with your existing residents or long-term residents of San Antonio.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us here. Honored to be on this panel to talk about a critical issue for our community, an issue that's not new for our nation, certainly not for the city of San Antonio. I'll start by saying that San Antonio is a 300-year-old municipality. We are an international city. We are called, for good reason, a confluence of cultures, the largest major metro nearest to the southern border in Texas, approximately 1.5 million people. And San Antonio has taken the approach that immigration, immigrants, and our immigrant community is a vital part of our society. And that is empirically true. And I'll start by saying the reason is outside of our indigenous population, just about everybody in our community is an immigrant at one point or another. We do have immigrants from all over the world, most notably from Central and South America. Obviously, we're a Mexican-American community, the largest Latino majority city in the country. Approximately 303,000 of our residents today are immigrants, and foreign-born. And the vast majority are from Central America, from Mexico. However, you look beyond that, Cuba, Haiti, refugees from around the world. We've had approximately 3,700 refugees through the Office of Refugee Resettlement in FY23. Obviously, the conversation politically over the last several years has been about migration. We have had since 2022. Approximately 420,000 migrants come through our city. The vast majority of those move on to other destinations. But San Antonio is an international community. So how do we balance the needs? First, I will tell you that there's not a member of this panel that I think would assert the fact that local governments don't have control over border policy. We simply don't. We don't control immigration policy in America. However, if we did, we'd probably have solved it by now. And that immigration in this country is not what we see as a crisis because we've experienced it from the dawn of time. What we have that's unique in America, however, is a political crisis and how to deal with it and legislative paralysis. Our approach then, knowing that we are going to feel the impacts of migration and the impacts of failed policy, is the fact that we treat everyone as you would want to be treated. When you come to San Antonio, you're treated with dignity and respect. And we also make sure that we maintain order and public safety. In the face of migration, that is a challenge. We've had partnership, and I know we'll talk about that in just a moment. But the reality is, this is a multicultural society in San Antonio, just as we are in the United States, and we benefit from it. And just a few points of fact. Immigrants, foreign-born individuals in our community represent $370 million in local and sales taxes. They are contributing members of our community. In fact, roughly 14% of our workforce is foreign-born immigrants. Now, you couple that with the fact that immigrants in our community also own 30% of our small businesses, you get the picture that if this was an immigration issue, it's also an economic one, and we've got to figure this out in a practical way. So I'm always in awe of my community in San Antonio, that we have taken the approach that everyone in our city deserves to be treated with dignity. We deal with policy challenges, and we also deal with the impacts of failed policy when they reach our shores, but we do it in a way that upholds our values and makes us stronger as a community.
Thank you for highlighting that as an economic issue as well, Mayor. Councilmember Rodriguez, please.
Thank you. So I'm from originally from San Antonio, Texas. So it's fortunate that I'm the now with mayor from my hometown. Growing up in San Antonio, Texas, obviously my family, comes from, we spent every spring break, every summer in Mexico. That was growing up. That's a vacation in San Antonio, Texas, a long time. So I'm definitely very proud of my heritage there, and my ancestry from Mexico. So I've seen, all the other good that happens in that community. It still does. So I'm still very proud of that. Now representing Arizona, I served in the military for 21 years, and I retired out of the Army. And I served with lots of people that were immigrants as well. So they provide to our society more than a lot of people do that are citizens right now. So I'm very proud of them as well, that have served with me and went to combat with me as well. But where I'm at now is, you probably never heard of Sierra Vista, Arizona. A lot of people think that the map ends at I-10, but it doesn't. You can come down 30 minutes down from I-10 down to our community. We have Fort Huachuca down there is an Army base. It's the Humber capital of the United States, and also the true home of the Buffalo Soldiers. So we have a lot of pride in our community. And as the crow flies, we're about 8 miles from the border. So we have cities that are around us that are actually on the border, the county below us in county land, and then we're right there. So we're the biggest metropolitan city, you could say, in that area. So lots of amazing, good traffic and commerce that comes from Mexico every day. And I think that's very important to have that partnership with them, because tourism and like I said, that commerce is very important to have that, to keep that up. And if we just completely close the border off, that would definitely affect us all here in this room. Unfortunately, there's some downsides to that, as well as, we deal with high-speed chases, things like that come through our community. And a lot of those are paid for by the cartel, using apps online, such as Snapchat or Telegram. For all you guys that are from different cities and states, they're coming from your states as well, to make some easy money. It's targeted at certain people, and they know who to target. So if you don't get those messages on Snapchat or Telegram, they're not looking for you. But we see those teenagers go down there, and unfortunately, they're promised money or quick bucks. They come down to our community, fill up as many people as they can, and the instructions are drive north to I-10, do not stop for police or law enforcement. So unfortunately, that causes a safety issue for us, and that's those high-speed chases that we get, call them load vehicles. Unfortunately, sometimes they're mixed with some fentanyl in there as well. So that's kind of what we're dealing with in my community. We don't have a huge influx, you'd say, because it's a pass-through community. We don't have a lot to offer when it comes to resources and things like that. People just kind of want to pass through and go along their way somewhere else, much like in San Antonio. And their intent is to go to I-10 and go elsewhere. So it's a little bit unique thing that we deal with in Sierra Vista. And obviously we're trying to, and we're there to help as much as possible. And we have some things set up in place if we do end up having to welcome more people and open it up to them.
Councilmember, I have one follow-up question. You talked about the high-speed chases. How has your law enforcement department adjusted to that? What have you had special training? What have you done with that, and who have been your partners in that regard?
It's a great question. Thank you very much. Well, luckily we've had some support from the state. We have Operation Safe Streets down there, and that allows us the state has given us grants to allow our police officers to work overtime on these task force down on the border. That way they can, and some people ask, why do they see our local PD down on the border? Why are we down in Bisbee? It's all part of that partnership. And our sheriff, Mark Daniels, actually partnered with all the sheriffs in Arizona, all the way from, the res lands out to other communities. And so we have sheriffs that are actually part of that operation as well. And all that overtime is paid for by state budget, which helps us as being a smaller city. We only have 45,000 people in our community, so not a very big budget. So it definitely helps us out because that would really strain us. By having those officers down there, it really helps prevent the chase from coming into our community. That's a little bit more built up. Unfortunately, there is some damage that's done down there in the rural land. Running into people's fences and things like that, and property and leaving trash. Unfortunately, but the intent is to keep them from kind of bottlenecking the situation down there at the border or above us before they hit I-10.
Thank you for that. Mayor Shepherd, would you talk about the impact of newcomers in Clearfield, please?
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously a little bit different than San Antonio, sure, and different than Sierra Vista, although I do know where Sierra Vista is. Good.
We're all getting a lesson in geography, by the way.
I spent a while in Tucson, so I know where Sierra Vista is. But we are different. We're significantly further north, and so we don't see that same kind of influx. We're not the pass-through. We're the destination. All right. We know that people are coming to Clearfield. They're coming to Utah because they've heard that's the place to go. 2006, we had 1,000 immigrant cases in Utah. Last year, over 20,000.
Wow.
So it is significantly increased, and we are seeing it.
So why have they heard that that's the place to go? I mean,
Well, and that's a really good question. The family talk, probably more than anything, that they've heard that this is a wonderful place to live. They're very accepting people. They have lots of services, and they'll take care of you. And so we see that influx coming in. Clearfield itself, we're 36,000 people, and we're one of the most diverse communities in the entire state. We don't. We're not checking boxes. No one's coming into my city and coming to the city office and saying, "Hey, I'm immigrating here. How can you help me?" They just show up, and so we see them in various places. We see our school population growing. We see English as a second language needing to be taught more and more and more in our schools because we've got kids that just don't speak English when they show up, and yet they need that same education. They expect those same services. Our food banks are overwhelmed at this point, and they're overwhelmed because I've got 2 food banks that don't require identification, that don't require some proof of, oh, here's my driver's license, or oh, here's my address. They don't ask. They deal with about 1,100 people a week, 1,100 families that show up as a drive-through in the city, and they load those cars up with food and take care of them. It's a problem. We see those effects on a daily basis. We've seen the drug issues. We've seen the fentanyl use. We've seen other issues throughout the city and our neighboring communities. But we're that spot where they're showing up. So they are going into San Antonio, and as they get there, it's a where do we go? And a lot of that's go to Utah.
So when you think about the additional people who are accessing your safety net institutions, your food bank, other nonprofits, would you all talk about the impact that it's having on the municipal budgets, the overall budgets? Councilmember Rodriguez, I'm going to start with you with that.
Sure, thanks. And before I came, I reached out to my partners and my sister cities there to make sure I got the information from them as well. Cities like Douglas, Arizona, where they're right on the border as well. My wife works down there on the border as a teacher, and they've reached out to local organizations like churches and things like that. Unfortunately, some fear mongering is happening, and those churches have received threats, so they had to move that location to the Welcome Center. And when I say that location, what that was used for was, at the time, we had a big influx of people coming across in the Yuma sector. So Border Patrol was pushing them to Tucson sector. We have a lot of agents down there in Naco and Douglas that normally aren't that as busy as those sectors. So they were busing them over. And because of the Jane Doe law, you can only have them detained for so long. They have to release them. So they were doing street releases at one point. At the height of this, and they were just kind of dumping people in the Safeway parking lot, which was inhumane and not the human thing to do. But that's what they were told. You can't hold for 48 hours, release them wherever into the community. there's no transportation in the rural Arizona. There's no bus system. We don't have a Greyhound. We don't have a train that takes you to I-10, and that doesn't exist. And unfortunately, some people in DC thought that was a good thing to do and made that decision, and it affected our communities that way. So they reached out, like I said, to nonprofits and churches, and unfortunately had to do some changing, but it didn't really affect their budget as much as just, luckily we were a giving community in Arizona, Southern Arizona, and, those people wanted to help, like churches and stuff like that. Similar in Bisbee as well. They have a shelter that opened up and said, hey, we'll help you guys out. Some nonprofits came and brought food and water. In the meantime, while they waited for their ride, when I say their ride, the nonprofit in Tucson, like Las Casalitas, is a great organization there in Tucson that helps out by bringing their own bus to come pick up immigrants there, bring them back to their facility. They give them shelter, food, water, let them take a shower, and then they assist them with getting on to their next destination. So budgetly, we're not constrained so much. We got to get creative very fast and think of what happens next if this gets any worse. So we did look around our community, and maybe we found a facility that was a former detention facility, a juvenile building we're not using anymore. So if we ever needed to use it as a temporary shelter, that might be something that we use. It's actually a county building within our city limits. But other than that, like I said, we have a plan just in case. But fiscally, it hasn't stretched us so far. And like I mentioned, our officers are busy. And unfortunately, with things like Prop 314 from Arizona, which is similar to other propositions in other states, people don't understand a lot of times that when those things get voted on, they don't come with any resources. There's no money behind them. So you're strained. Our police officers and our sheriffs, they're already strained enough doing their own job. And now you want them to be Border Patrol officers, basically, and enforce a federal law. It doesn't make any sense. That will strain our budgets immensely if you're expecting our local police officers and sheriffs to do that job.
Mayor Nirenberg, would you talk about the impact on your budget in San Antonio, please?
I will, and I'll start by saying the result of inaction upstream in terms of policy and the lack of any major immigration reform in 40 years is the fact that we're spending a lot of money downstream to deal with the impacts. That's the reality. And I understand the frustration in that, but we've got to work downstream in the local communities to deal with the impacts, and we can do that in a way that I believe treats people with dignity, but also protects public safety and maintains order in the process. Those are the three priorities for us in San Antonio. But upstream, we can't lose sight of the fact that this is going to continue to happen. This is going to continue to happen unless lawmakers are willing to do their jobs. And we've seen that, in fact, through executive actions that are always challenged in the courts. We've seen some executive actions taken in the last 6 to 12 months that have had a serious impact, positive impact in terms of the downstream effect. In fact, roughly 75% to 90% in our community decrease in the number of arrivals since those executive actions took place. Those were the kinds of actions, coupled with border security and technology to prevent fentanyl from getting into our country. Those were the actions that were part of a bipartisan, good faith negotiated piece of legislation that was nearly brought to fruition in the bipartisan border bill. So there are solutions to prevent us from having to deal with this. But in terms of the impacts to resources at the local level in San Antonio, we have had great cooperation at the federal level to help us with those resources and the operations we need to maintain order, again, protect public safety, but also give people what they need who are here, let me underscore, legally under the current immigration framework. Through FEMA and Department of Homeland Security, we've had a lot of assistance through the Shelter and Services Program, which was set up for this purpose. When there are disasters or influx of people into our community, we have resources to make sure that we have stood up a center where people can get the relief that they need and also be sheltered for a couple of days, sometimes more. They were able to access the transportation so they can get to their sponsor families or their next destination. So we've had services through the Shelter and Services Program because this is an emergency, again, created by a political crisis. But because of those services and cooperation at the federal level, we have not had to impact our local budget. We don't know the future of the Shelter and Services Program. So my city council has already had a conversation, well, what next? Because we're not looking upstream. to deal with the inflows in a legal fashion. So what are city councils, what are local communities going to do when there are no resources in place at the federal level to assist with the fact that we're doing their jobs? Well, we're going to have to look at local city budgets, because what's the effect if we don't? What is the alternative? I know folks are frustrated by that conversation sometimes in the local community, but what is the impact to our communities if we have an influx of migrants and there are no resources to help at the federal level? Shall we just have them arrive and sleep in the park like they used to? Or have we congregate perhaps in downtown areas looking and asking for help? We have great community-wide collaboration from our faith communities, from Catholic charities, from nonprofit organization, from folks who, through the charity of their hearts, help with this, but that's not nearly enough to deal with the impact. So we've had some initial conversations about how many local resources, what local resources at the city level, our budget is going to be impacted if we don't continue to get that release. We haven't gotten there yet. We've had all of this, again, assisted through FEMA, through the Shelter and Services Program and Department of Homeland Security. But again, this is the train that's coming if we continue to stay on a political, if we continue to stay on the political discourse about immigration in the country without any practical solutions to address the issue, as we saw with the bipartisan legislation.
Thank you for raising that. Mayor Shepherd, I want to ask you, how have you addressed the fact that there is no federal legislation right now that provides the relief that you need, but at the same time, Clearfield is a destination, as you've already said. So who are your partners? How have you brought people to the table to collaborate so that you can meet the needs of new residents in your community?
Well, I'd say our biggest partners in the city are our faith community. Utah is known as the most charitable state in the country. We have more volunteer hours and more help given out than anywhere else, and so we rely heavily upon those faith-based that faith-based community to help us as we're dealing with this population coming in. But that can only go so far. And so without that federal relief coming in, without the responsible, someone at that federal level taking responsibility for what is coming our way, it will begin to weigh more and more and more on our cities. We'll deal with it. We'll deal with it in police. For the first time ever in Davis County, in our county, we've been asked now to provide a homeless shelter. Our homeless have always gone either south to Salt Lake or north to Ogden and have stayed out of the other counties. And now each of the counties has been asked to create a homeless shelter. We're dealing with a significant increase of that population. And how do we deal with it? How do we put that forth? How do we as a city create a homeless solution on our own without that federal help? So it's taxing on us. They're there. And that said, the immigrant population is a big part of our community. Again, not trying to segregate. I certainly don't look for, are you an immigrant or are you not?
Right.
I don't weigh people out that way as the mayor. We serve the population because they're there. We don't budget differently because we have this influx and saying, well, we need X amount because of our immigrant population. We budget because we budget. Have we increased our police force over the last several years? Yes, we have. We've had that need. It doesn't make it a bad thing. We deal with that. We're a manufacturing community, so I know that is a good portion of why that population comes to Clearfield. We have a third of my city is one manufacturing facility, multiple companies, but one center, and that's a huge part of our workforce. We are building houses like crazy and seeing things go forward. That is another big part of our immigrant workforce. So we have the good and the bad. There is again, I think Mayor Nierenberg said, early on, at some point, we were all immigrants. I mean, our families, I have no idea where mine came from, but at some point or another, we all immigrated to this country. And I don't want to we have needs from a federal level. We have some responsibility needs from a federal level to deal with this situation. But at the same time, we have a population that is here, and at the local level, we are going to have to deal with it. And we're the end zone. We're the end game. We have to come up with the solutions on how to take care of it.
So each of you has spoken in a very open and welcoming way about newcomers to your community. Given the national discourse, I know that all of your residents don't mirror that position. How do you all deal with it?
Well, if I may, you raised that question at the outset. What are you doing to balance the needs of your local community with the immigrant community? And if your community sees, if your local residents see immigrants coming to our community, migrants coming to the community that are somehow getting services that they're not entitled to, then there's resentment. I will suggest that homelessness, poverty, the need for a job and education, a safe place to stay, these are also issues that local residents are struggling with. And so, we talked about English as a second language. In Texas, the state of our public education system, I want English to be a first language for our students. Our state has defunded public education. And so we need to recognize that local residents are struggling. So in San Antonio, I'm very proud of the fact that we are looking out to make sure that, number one, there's economic security in the household, meaning that you can afford the roof that you live in, the house that you live in. And we have a housing crisis in America, and we're racing against a tidal wave. We are also ensuring, and this is ongoing work, I'm not suggesting that there's any mission accomplished banner to be flown, but everybody in this community, in our city, and I would argue in our nation, if you want to live above the poverty line, you need more than you need more than a high school diploma. You need a post-secondary education, whether that's a college diploma, a technical certificate, a trade. And so we're creating pathways for every single person in our city to find one. And that was a voter-approved initiative. So housing and workforce. Now, what's the next biggest expense for people in our community? It's trying to get to work or to your school or wherever you're going. So we need better and more alternatives to transportation. So we're building that. We've been able to say to our community, look, all the essentials to thrive in a city that residents should be entitled to, that quite often we feel like are not addressed by our nation, our state, and sometimes our local level, we're doing those things. And so when it comes to somebody who's arrived at our community because of, frankly, laws that you might disagree with, those laws, unfortunately, are not our jurisdiction, but we do have an obligation as a compassionate community to treat people with dignity and respect, protect your safety at the same time, and maintain order in the process. We've been able to do all those things. And thankfully, we do have some outliers and some, rabble-rousing from a political perspective. But by and large, our community has gotten behind this approach. Things get stirred up and ginned up at a political level, but I can look people in my community straight-eyed and saying that we're doing the right thing and we're protecting their resources and their livelihoods at the same time.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you. Our community is, like I said, a little unique. We have a big, strong military community, a lot of veterans as well, and very positive for the most part. But recently, we had an instance where somehow it got out there that our city council was going to vote on voting our city as a sanctuary city. I don't know where that came from. It was a one of those fear mongering tactics. Send out a bunch of emails. Our council room was full of people yelling at us, calling us, communists and things like that, and just yelling at us. Unfortunately, the way the rule is, as the open meeting law, we can't respond to those comments. So it's frustrating sometimes when you deal with that. But we know that that doesn't speak for our entire community. Yes, there's plenty of that out there, like Mariner Burke said. Some outliers that will do things like that. But we are taking care of our community first, always. And we have a small homeless population. So people did bring that up. How are you going to open up the shelter to them. We have homeless people on the streets. We have a homeless shelter as well. We have some areas, some people that are veterans, and the people that reached out to those veterans as well that are homeless. A lot of them, unfortunately, they choose that life. They want to live out in the desert, and they don't want to come to the shelter. So it's not like we were not offering something else that we don't offer anybody else. Nobody's jobs are being taken in our community. As much as people like to copy and paste that everywhere, if anything, people don't want to show up to work that are American citizens. We have so many jobs out there in our community that are just open because nobody shows up for whatever their reasons may be. But there's nobody taking our jobs, and there's definitely nobody eating our dogs and cats in Sierra Vista either. So it's just,
There's this big guy out there.
so like I said, by and large, our community is very welcoming. But there are some things that we deal with every now and then. And as a council, we all agree, and from our mayor on down, that we're going to do what we can to make sure our citizens are always safe, that the facilities that they need and require are always provided for our citizens. But we are also always want to do the human thing. Nobody should be smuggled in a car, in a trunk of a car. Babies and toddlers that don't know where their parents are, they shouldn't be brought in vehicles under those circumstances, driving over 100 miles an hour down a highway, and then who knows what happens. That's not humane, and nobody should be dumped off in the parking lot of Safeway and said, good luck, enjoy your life. That is not humane either. So, like I mentioned, luckily our community is giving in that case where we have good partnerships with Tucson, that we're keeping those things from happening and we're kind of just dealing with it as it comes. With this whole situation, I think we're all kind of building the plane in flight and just reacting to it. But like Mayor said, we are trying to look at the future and see what happens, what if this gets worse, whatever comes next with the next administration. So,
Mayor, you talked about having a manufacturing town. And how have your residents reacted to Clearfield as a final destination for newcomers?
Well, certainly we hear about it. You're not providing this, you're not providing that, or you're providing less of this because you're providing these other services. As a community grows, whether that's from immigration, whether that's from natural people coming in, more services are needed, and we see those those services needed by all segments of our population. Yes, we hear about it. Probably our biggest concern that we've had from our residents is a racism issue that we have never seen before. It's something that it made its way clear into the military, and so far that I clear up to the Secretary of the Air Force. We're a manufacturing community and a military community. We're the Home to Hill Air Force Base. In our school population, we saw a problem. And it was brought to a head because of the interaction with the military and an airman's family that had experienced that racism. And turned out the teacher as well. In fact, it started with a teacher referring to a young woman in her class as the black girl. And that's just because of that. All the kids called her the same thing. They had no idea. It was devastating to hear as a mayor that was the attitude that people were taking. And so we partnered with the Air Force and with our school district to address this. Air Force came up. Luckily, we had a phenomenal commander at the base at that point who started a program called United One. And so we took that on as well as the city and created Clearfield One, to where I go into each of the schools and speak to the students on being one and being accepting and uniting a community, and that we have to be together. It doesn't matter what you are, what you look like, we have to be together. And it's been crucial to us. I'd started a program years ago called Everyone Matters. And so we had to change that program and adapt it to be able to tell people that we are one. But it was amazing to me to see where this starts, and that it doesn't start with our kids, but that it's taught at home. Because I can sit down with a group of kids of different races, of different nationalities that speak different languages, and ask them, what's different between you and you? And those children will tell me She's wearing a blue shirt. He has glasses. Not once in all the time that I've done this has a student ever pointed out race. Okay. But now we see it starting to sneak its way in. And that scares me because I know that is coming from the other end of our population and the older folks that are looking at this saying, we have different people living into our community and they're different than me. And you're giving them the same treatment that you give us, and they're using our resources. And I explained to them that, yes, our resources are our resources. If we create a new park, it's not for our immigrant population. It's not for our Hispanic population or our Native American population. It is for our population. We all use those services, and we use them equally. And yes, I'm going to hear it from that group of people. I am certainly going to hear it. But we are one.
That's a powerful message coming from the top. And just want to commend you. And I'm sure that that's happening in San Antonio as well as in Sierra Vista. Looking forward, how do you navigate this territory? Thinking, obviously the best case would be to have federal policies that made everyone's life easier because it would be a clear path to citizenship. But we've been talking about that for a long time now. And that may or may not happen. So assuming, because we know as city leaders, you have to solve those problems when the federal government isn't delivering. What are you going to do? And how are you thinking about the future as you meet the needs of all of your residents?
Well, for better or for worse, oftentimes these conversations just get boiled down to the economics. And if you listen to our community, some of the leading voices on immigration reform and what needs to be done, the tweaks that need to happen in policy are coming from the business community. There have been successful programs in terms of work permitting, the Bracero program, some of you might have heard of, the visas to enable industry to operate that have allowed people the freedom and the right to work in this country, which most of them are coming to do anyways. You couple that with the fact that once those folks are able to work legally, there's also benefit to the local community in terms of, revenue generated, industries thriving, jobs being performed. Those things can happen, and those don't take comprehensive reform to do. So I think the first thing for us to do as we move to a new administration is to emphasize those things where I think there's broad common ground. But I don't think we can take our eye off the ball in terms of what are the more comprehensive things we need to do. We do know we need better border security. We need technology and agents and resources within the adjudication process to be able to protect from illegal drugs, illegal weapons, and frankly from people being trafficked in our country. Those things need to happen, and they're part of a broader package. But the other thing that needs to happen, in my view, is that this is one of the essential American questions, and it's a question about our democracy as well. The America that I grew up learning about was one in which people from all over the world immigrated, and we came here with the idea that we have a right to self-determination and self-governance, and we ought to build our communities so everyone can thrive and everyone has a voice in the process. To me, if we only approach this issue as immigrants are the deficit, we're losing the foundation of this country and the things that we learned about. And so I believe we need to find common ground. We need to open up the conversation again about more comprehensive reforms. But we also have to look within ourselves and ask ourselves, what kind of America are we leaving our children if we don't do this the right way?
Thank you for that. Looking ahead in Sierra Vista, what do you see, Councilman?
Thank you. Looking ahead from our Foxville there in Arizona, Southern Arizona. Like I mentioned before, things that are like Prop 14, 314, that are very dangerous when it comes to using E-Verify as for people to work. I've been fortunate to be in the military. I was in the military for 21 years. I got to live all over the world, all over the U.S. I was just down in the Keys this weekend before this happened. Look who's working those farms down there. Look who's working on your roofs. Look who's bringing that produce in from Nogales, Mexico. Look around and who's really the backbone of our when it comes to all that economy. And those people, imagine asking all of them to verify where they're from, by using an app before you get paid, before you get any benefits. You got to verify this app. What's going to happen to our community? Look around every day at things that you take for granted, every day in your life, and without that, just think about that for a minute. From whoever does whatever for you, whatever services that you pay for, who's going to do that if they're all gone? All right. So, and I grew up in, like I said, in San Antonio, Texas, seeing a lot of that as well. My grandfather grew up being a migrant farm worker, and I went to school with migrant kids, and we called them migrant kids. They're in different classrooms than us because they were the migrant kids. We didn't really know what that meant. We just know their families were working all day and they went to school with us, So I got to experience all that. So that's important to me. So for us not to forget any of that as we move forward, and you see this legislation gets passed that has, buzzwords on it that says border security. It sounds like a good thing. Do your research and really look into what that really means to you, your community, and the people around you. How's that going to affect us? How's it going to affect our kids? Like you said, moving forward, what kind of America are they going to be left with to deal with? And we got to do that right now.
Thank you for that. And Mayor Woos, we're going to give you the last word.
Well, we definitely use federal policy to curtail the immigration, to curtail what's coming, to curtail the illegal immigration and the flow in.
Sure.
I'm not going to go out and poll my population and find out which ones are there and which ones should, are there legally, which ones are not. That's not my role. It's not my purpose. If they're there, we have a home for them. If they're here, we need to take care of them. We need to provide the services for them. We need to find the ways to get them legal citizenship if that's what they're looking for. We're a country of immigrants. We were made that way. The thing that kills me is to look at an immigrant that put their family's life on the line to get here. That tells you how bad it had to have been where they were. And I put that first in my thoughts is, how bad does it have to be to put your family in the trunk of a vehicle or the back of a train and say, okay, you're going to get off wherever you get off, and that's where you are. We're going to find a new place because we've got to get out of here where we are. They're here. If they're in my community, they're part of my community, and we will take care of them the same way. We'll continue to create new partnerships as finances allow. We'll find those opportunities to take care of them. We've got Job Corps in our city that does a phenomenal job with our refugees. It gives them preference in there, and they're giving them skills. They're giving them a high school education. They're giving them something that they can take from there. And we've got plenty of those partnerships. We'll continue to find those and work forward, but we've got to have some federal policy to curtail that flow.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And these panelists have given hard and clear solutions for something that challenges all of our communities. And they've done it in a way that clearly shows the compassion of their communities, because beyond all of the buzzwords and all of the rhetoric are people. I mean, there are people, our brothers, our sisters, our aunts and uncles, who have come to this country for a better opportunity, like so many of our ancestors. So thank you all. Please give this panel a hand.
And thank you, our audience, for tuning in. A final thanks to the National League of Cities for making programs like this one possible. This was the fourth and final installment in our Road to Future Cities series for 2024. If you missed our stops in Lawrence, Kansas, Atlanta, Georgia, or St. Louis, Missouri, check them out. You can find all 4 TV programs at govexec.com/events. To learn more about the National League of Cities, head to nlc.org. For GovExec TV, on assignment here in Tampa, Florida, I'm George Jackson. Have a great day.